Hello, my future-proofing friends. This is the video you've all been waiting for, although you don't even know it. So, on the prior videos, we installed Linux on Windows so you can get a full screen Unix-like a Linux terminal. This is LSB_release all. This is Ubuntu 20.04. Focal Fossa, they call it. It's a pretty recent release. I do believe they're up to 22.04, but who needs to be there? This is bleeding edge enough. And in fact, this video is about installing Lxd containers. So, it seems like I'm covering all this really basic, top things you do on Windows, to just make it more usable, and it's so mundane. But honestly, it is to allow you to work better and more effectively and enjoyably, getting into the zone state, allowing the flow. So we cleaned up Windows and decluttered it. Then we installed Linux on Windows, and then we got Linux running full screen, as I just demonstrated. Now it's time for containers to start good habits. Unfortunately, containers are not ready for prime time on Ubuntu 20.04 because the Lxd, I think is how it's pronounced, wizard doesn't work. There's reasons for this, and if you're a system admin or a network engineer, you could probably figure it out and solve it directly with complex commands. Or you can just install Ubuntu 18.04, keep it running, and then install it on 20, and then do the Lxd install under 20.04 while it's running on 18.04, and it makes it work on 20.04. That's what this video is about. And then you can optionally go and delete the 18.04. So that's what we're going to do. I've got some notes that I keep here because we need to activate a feature of Linux called systemd, which is not turned on by default in the Microsoft provided Windows subsystem for Linux distros. What are you talking about, Mike? What do you mean the distros of Linux from Microsoft? So there's a few things you ought to know. Go into Google and Google on Wsl commands. You need to have visited this page. You can get it from the WSL command itself, but it's nice to have it as a, right in front of you web page documented, right? It talks about WSL install, which is what we did to get 20.04, required to reboot. We needed an admin privileged PowerShell to start the process, but now we have Linux on our machine. You can see which distros you have, right? So I'm jumping ahead. You can WSL list. Let me just show it to you. Over here on the virtual screen to the right, we will open a PowerShell. Now, here's an interesting thing. I defaulted this to load our Linux full screen, and it very much makes you feel like it's just Linux. There ain't much you can do about, anything else, but you can. Even once you go full screen, you can hit function F11 and it'll bring up your tabs, right? You can go back to pseudo full screen where you can still see your taskbar, but now you've got your tabs, and in your tabs you can now bring up a PowerShell, and now the PowerShell is usable because you can control plus it to get a bigger font. This is as opposed to the PowerShell you might find if you go like this. It's just terrible. You can't make the font bigger. Full screen can never be real full screen. So we have PowerShell here under the unified Microsoft terminal program, right? So this is PowerShell. You can tell by the backslash, C:\\, right? You ain't gonna see that in Unix, let me tell you. Unix/Linux. I sometimes say Unix when I mean Linux, but they're very similar for these types of purposes. Okay, so when you're in PowerShell, you can use the WSL commands like WSL list, which will show you the Linuxes you have on your machine. Now, I do believe there's a verbose mode to show you the details, because it's just saying Ubuntu default. We need to know versions and stuff. So let's try verbose. I think that's there. There. Okay. So it's still not telling us it's 20.04, but I know it is, right? So another variation of WSL list that we're using here is WSL list online. These are the versions you can download from Microsoft. All right. So you can pull down Ubuntu 16.04, 18.04, 20.04, and some other very interesting versions. Let me tell you, having Kali Linux in there buys Microsoft a lot of street cred. It's the hackers Linux. But we're interested in 18.04 because that makes the Lxd, the Linux container install go smoothly. So clear, all right, WSL -- install -- distribution. Okay, so it gets a little hard to remember what's what, right? So that's why we go back here. We can see distribution. The syntax nomenclature. All right, so if you forget it, you can just open another PowerShell. You see that? WSL list online. And if you set your PowerShell up correctly, and I should have covered this, this is a setting. What I'm about to do here, clicking like that, going over here and right clicking. Oh, I didn't do it yet. Haha. So I need to show it to you so that it works, right? You go into settings, and one of the most important settings to make is on interaction. On interaction, you want to automatically copy selection to the clipboard. You turn that on. It's just so important. Save. And so now you can do stupid terminal tricks like this. We highlight Ubuntu 18.04 because that exact letter arrangement is important over in this command. And now we can paste it in by just a right click or a 2-finger click on the right hand side of your trackpad. I'll make that font a little bigger. So this will install Ubuntu 18.04 on this machine. Ready? Don't blink. Isn't this nice? Can you imagine this working? Can you imagine Microsoft bringing this to you? It's amazing. It's a gift, people. If you don't use this, if you don't utilize this, you're nuts. All right, so we'll use the same Ubuntu as our username and the same foo as our password. It makes us retype it. Okay, so it's there. And now we just close the heck out of this. Close all, that's fine, right? You bring up your terminal back up. One of the things about Linux under Windows is it's, as long as it's not running a task that you don't want to lose, it's always safe to close these things. Function F11 will bring back your tabs, and I'm bringing back the tabs so I can go into settings and make the font a little bigger. I'm tired of pressing Control plus all the time, so that's appearance. Is it appearance? Where's your fonts? Color schemes, rendering, actions, language. Ugh. Startup, interaction, appearance. Defaults. Appearance under defaults, of course. Thank you, Microsoft. 12. 20 will do. Save. All right, and once again, we close all of these. Always safe to do, right? Open it up, and there's a nice big font. All right, and let's see. That's my default for everything, so getting it for PowerShell as well should be, whoops, I did a Windows tab. I meant to do function F11. All right, so we've got our tabs, and take a look here. We now have Ubuntu 18.04 as an option. That's Ubuntu 18.04. This is a different Linux than in tab 1. LSB_release all, right, 20.04. And in this tab, lsb underscore release all 18.04. You see? It's amazing, right? You're running two simultaneous versions of Linux, and it's like it's no big. People who run virtual machines under VirtualBox are probably green with envy at this kind of stuff. Microsoft has done this well. So they've given you the path off of Windows. Take it, all right? So let's just jump right into it. Sudo apt update. We're going to have to update everything. Foo is the password I made for this. You want to be on the latest. You want to be on the latest on both sides, so I might as well sudo apt update, even though I did this just recently on this side. For you folks on the videos, you saw me do it here. See, everything's up to date, so I don't have to do a sudo apt upgrade, which I will on this side. So sudo apt upgrade. This is just like doing a Windows update of all your components. Now I make the font smaller so that it doesn't have all those gaps. This is just like after you do a fresh Windows install, you need to go to the system update and get all the updates, all the service packs, and, feature bundles or whatever they are. Yeah, same thing on Linux side. Things change, new releases come out, especially on a version like Ubuntu, which is very consumer oriented, public facing. There's versions of Linux that don't get updated quite as often as Ubuntu, but Ubuntu is frequently updated, as is Debian, which is the version, the lineage from which Ubuntu is derived from. So Ubuntu isn't completely, created from scratch in the Linux world. In the Linux world, they choose something higher up the descendancy tree to derive from, right? So there's Linux source as released by Linux.org and Linus Torvalds and company. And then there's people who actually take what the formal, definition of Linux is, and then they massage it this way and that, mostly putting in their own software repository system, the free and open source software repo, right? That's what you see here. This is doing a bunch of updates of all the various software that's on your machine installed from a free and open source software repository called the Debian, software, or the Debian package manager. And it was Debian's original claim to fame. It's what made that lineage of Linux so darn popular, even in the face of the billion-dollar IBM-backed Red Hat lineage of Linux, which is Fedora and CentOS and a lot of very expensive enterprise service contract oriented Linux. When Linux is used in business and it needs a lot of expensive paid consultants to maintain it, they use the Red Hat, Fedora, CentOS lineage of Linux. When you're working at home and you just want everything to work and you want a wonderful user experience, you use the Debian lineage of Linux, which includes Ubuntu. Ubuntu has a lot of money infused into it from Microsoft, and so they have a lot of hardware and driver support. And so that's what you see happening here. You see all the updates from the Ubuntu software repository being applied. And it's quite a lot. It's far more than I would think that should be necessary. This is an indication of Microsoft not keeping their local Ubuntu images up to date, not nearly as well as the Lxd container system does. And we'll see that a little bit later. This is just about done. So hope that was a useful education. Control L is another way to clear. I always type clear, but one of my users told me I should Control L it. And let's see, now that that's updated, you can do sudo apt install, and we double check that we're on the second tab. We are, because that's where I want to do the Lxd install. Sudo apt install Lxd. All right. It's already at newest version. Isn't that wonderful? Lxd set to manually install. All right, so now that it's actually there and all our software is updated, we do the initialization process. This is the part that just does not work on any version except (18.04). There's a sweet spot. There's a certain magic that's occurring here when you do Lxd init. All right. Error failed to connect to... we don't have systemd. Lxd init will not work until systemd is installed. Okay. So to get systemd installed, I'm going to show you what we're using, but I have the scripts prepared here ahead of time, right? So I can get out of this and show you that I have what I need prepared here for copy and paste purposes, right? So I could just copy and paste this in and get this thing called systemd activated, but you should know, and I'll do that in this virtual screen, that I'm using something called distro-d. Distro-d is just something that's been developed and is available on GitHub, and it has a few different options. It has an option 1 and it has an option 2, and what I'm doing is the option 2 here, blah 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 blah, but all we do really is go to my release notes and we copy this, Control-C to copy, we go over here and we paste it in, paste anyway. All right, now we have to activate it, and we have to do this in 2 passes because I lost my pointer. Why did I lose my pointer? Okay, escape key. Because the sudo command is here, you can't do multiple commands together, sudos in a row. This has one sudo here to turn it to run the install script. So there's another sudo, so we have to enable the service like this. I lost an S there, so I put the S in. Distro-d has been enabled. Now your shell will start under systemd. Now this is really weird. I'm going to show you how to confirm the fact that you're currently not on systemd and that you're about to be on systemd. No one would know this unless they did the research. But there's something called PS, which shows you you're running stuff. And PS can be done on particular task IDs. See these PIDs? Your very first task ID in your system is 1. So you can look at it and you can see it's /init. But that really doesn't answer your question yet, because that could be either sysv or it could be systemd. Sysv is the older version. So you have to do that same command with a /o for formatting, I believe, asking for the com column and for task ID 1. Okay, so now seeing that init there, see how it's not leading, it doesn't have the /leading, it's actually a different column I asked for, right? So ps-o com1 shows us that it's sysv, the old init system. Now I simply close this, I close it again, and then I bring up terminal. So my default terminal is going to be 20.04, so I function F11, right? Isn't this wonderful? So many convolutions, but it's worth it for the benefit you're going to get, right? So now I can bring up an 1804, and now that I've restarted the shell, I can do ps-o comm task PID1. Systemd confirmed. Systemd is active on the system. And now with systemd active, we can do what we could not do before, which is Lxd init. I don't even have to sudo it. That's because of 18.04. I'm going to have to sudo it on the 20.04 side. And this is the wizard starting for getting the Lxd container system running. Guess what? You just hit enter all the way down. There's one of these you should take special notice of. This network bridge is an important one. But what it's being called, this Lxd BR0, is interesting to note. Lxd BR0, right? And that's it. It completed the wizard successfully. We now have the Lxd container system on Ubuntu 18.04 under systemd under the Windows subsystem for Linux. All right, it's a big deal, trust me. Now we're going to do what could not be done unless you did this step, right? So installing it 18.04 side makes you able to do it 20.04 side. However, on this side, you have to sudo lxd init. It will not work without sudo on 20.04. All right. Lxd command not found, really? Okay, so sudo apt install lxd. All right, so on 20.04, you do have to install it. It's not there by default. Control L to clear it, and then back to that command, sudo lxd init. We have not installed systemd, so once again, we do these couple of commands. I guess over here I have to hit escape to get my pointer back. And we go over here. We get these commands. Now again, when you need these commands, just Google distro D and use option 2. Now this may change in the future. It should change. It's a mystery to me why Microsoft does not enable the key feature of Linux, systemd, right? Linux has improved miraculously lately by adding systemd, ripped off from Apple's Launchd. Command URL. What did I get wrong? Oh, curl. I just missed the C. I copied it wrong. All right. Yeah. We can always do it a line at a time, right? Copy. Clear. Paste the first line for curl. That fetches a file. This changes the permission on the file. Look, it's just automatically chopping the first character off whenever I do that. There's a weirdness going on that I just have to remain hyper aware of for making this video successful. By the way, I'm using the keyboard shortcut to switch virtual screen, so you're not seeing the transitions because of the way the screen recording software works. So I'll try and use the 4-finger swoosh to do that. So it's pretty consistent. It's chopping off the first character. The fates do not want this to be demonstrated, ladies and gentlemen. I do not think it is in Microsoft's best interest. Not that I'm paranoid about it, not excessively so, but this is something that if Microsoft were to have wanted to be possible easily, it would easily be possible by making systemd turned off by default. Now I'm going to exit out of both, and we're going to go back into terminal. Now here's the interesting thing, right? Now I can double check that systemd is there. I didn't do the before, but trust me, it would have been in it. ps-o space comm space 1, right? There's systemd, lsb_release -all. We're on 20.04. Sudo. I've just done this so much now. Sudo lxd init. This is the wizard. This is the wizard. Is it? No, that's expected. I've seen that error before. This is the wizard. This is the wizard that would have failed had we not done the process immediately prior under 18.04. And the only difference now is when I started the init process, I had to put the word sudo in. Getting systemd running was the same on both sides. Now I stopped at the line here where it's not going to work. What would you like the new bridge to be called? The bridge lxd br0 is already used. It would create an error if I just hit enter. So I'm going to do lxd br1 so it doesn't conflict. And it gets past it. And the rest is just the default enters again on the wizard. This is million-dollar knowledge, ladies and gentlemen. It's a big deal to get LXD running on 20.04 under WSL. Okay, so now we have LXD. How to demonstrate it? Once LXD is installed, you actually have something called Lxc on your machine. Okay, and it shows you all the instructions for it. And let's see. Lxc, all the commands are Lxc. Okay, so here's your available commands. I'm going to refresh my memory. It's really weird, the syntax, but it's what they chose. So Lxd launch is what we're going to need to get a yet another Linux installation, and we'll do a 20.04. And let's see, list instances, move. So this is now that I refreshed my memory, I'll go back up to a bigger font size. Lxd list. No, Lxc list. Lxc list. All right, it's the first time we're running it, so it tells you what to do in order to put a new container on here. So it is, and by the way, listing is about the only thing you don't have to sudo at this point. So we're going to follow their advice, but we're going to put 20.04, right? So here's the syntax, right? So so this is the before, right? It tells you might as well try pulling down an image to get into a container. Lxc, it takes a lot of mental discipline to remind yourself that once Lxd is installed, Lxd, D stands for daemon. A daemon is a Linux service running transparently in the background. You don't see it, you don't interact directly with it at all. Lxc is the command line interface command to interact with the Lxd daemon. All right, so Lxc launch. I said it has to be sudoed. Everything has to be sudoed now for Lxc. Lxc launch, except for listing, that doesn't need sudo. Ubuntu 20.04. Let the magic happen. Creating the instance, retrieving the image from Ubuntu, a nice pristine image. Now I'm going to ask you to take special note of the prompt. We are currently the user Ubuntu at desktop-npsr-spo. Okay, so that was a default host name of my Windows system when I reset it to factory default, right? So that gets used as the host name for your Linux instance. This is Linux directly under the Windows subsystem for Linux, or sub-Linux as I like to call it. So from this instance of sub-Linux, we're creating a sub-Linux. We actually did create one. It's called glad-liger. I guess that's half lion, half tiger. It's a glad one. I'm very glad we have a liger because it'd be terrible to have an upset one. Is it there? Lxc space list. Even listing them needs sudo now. Wow. Look at that. And I have to make it a little smaller. All right. We have an instance running of Ubuntu 20.04, a Linux container. Now, I told you to take note of this command prompt. It's because we are going to log in. We're going to log into our glad liger. How do we do that? Sudo Lxc exec. We're going to execute a command on it. We have to do 2 minus signs and a space to delineate the execute parameter from the command that's going to be executed. What we're going to execute is switch user, which has its own arguments, which is login as the user Ubuntu, which is the default that was set up when the image was pulled down. You ready? Watch that prompt. Oh, not found. Let's see. Sudo Lxd exec hyphen space su space minus minus login Ubuntu. I wonder what was not found. Oh, yeah. It has to be executed on a particular machine. You got to tell it which container. Lxd execute against glad liger. We are now Ubuntu at glad liger. We are logged into the container, ladies and gentlemen. This is huge. I know it looks like a lot of gobbledygook to you, but this is honestly very large and important. And to show you we have network connectivity, I'm going to do a clear. I'm going to make our font bigger again. I'm going to do a sudo apt update. Now you remember how many updates were required when we grabbed Linux from Microsoft? Now when we grab a container from Ubuntu, let's see how much updates are actually required. It was like 250 when we grabbed 20.04 from Microsoft. It's 11 here. They don't keep it perfectly up to date, but considerably more up to date. Sudo apt update. Sudo apt update. And it'll update those 11 packages. Oh no, I'm sorry. I did update again. It's sudo apt upgrade. It'll upgrade those 11 packages. Yes, we got to answer yes. And that long wait on the other Linux from Microsoft side, the sub Linux, is going to be tremendously quicker here on the sub Linux, the Lxd Linux. All right, after this is done, this was a lot for a single video. I'm going to wind up by going ahead and deleting, unregistering the 18.04, so we only have 20.04 on our machine. Ubuntu 20.04, focal fossa. We're going to get rid of Ubuntu 18.04, Bionic Beaver, and that will avoid confusion in the future. And the only downside is we got to sudo all this Lxc stuff that I'm really not thrilled about, but that's the only downside of being on a more up-to-date Ubuntu, at least once Lxd is installed. All right, so exit. See the requester go back from Ubuntu at glad liger to Ubuntu at my crazy host name from Windows. We'll do another exit, and then it'll close that down entirely, right? Now what we want is a PowerShell to do the command to uninstall. And let's see, I'm going to do that from here just to make sure everyone understands that these commands are being issued Windows side. So you might as well see a classic PowerShell window. I'll go into properties and make the font a little more visible. The 20 usually does it. Oh, it's on 20. Maybe 28 does it. All right, so WSL --list. It shows you that we now have these two different Ubuntus installed. Now on the web commands, that I had showing, okay, you get it by doing WSL commands. You know, Microsoft does good enough SEO. It's the first listing. And there's install distribution. We did all that. We listed the all lines, verbose to see versions, and version default, setting the default, blah, 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 blah. So we're looking for unregister, right? So I know what we're really looking for. It's like deleting. Should be called delete, but it's unregister. There it is, WSL space minus minus unregister in the distribution name, right? So we go back to here. And now that we have that, click to copy. Oh, that's under the unified Windows terminal. So when you do it from here, it's usually best to edit, copy. Copy would just be hitting enter, so enter would have worked. But now we can do WSL space minus minus unregister space, right click, Yeah, right click. Ubuntu 18.04. We're going to get rid of that one and keep that one, right? Boom. Unregistering, that's a delete. It's gone. Now we can do WSL list again. Now we only have Ubuntu default. Now, as a bonus feature, it's always good to do a true and full shutdown. Like, is this really working? You don't know until you force these Linux systems that are running transparently in the background to do a true shutdown. So that would be WSL space minus minus shutdown. Okay, that has closed down all instances of running Linuxes in the background. So we can close out of this. And then the next time we go in through here, that's a full boot, right? I talk about these delays on that first load. And we have no, you can't do this LXD. It's sudo LXD. And it would be list, right? No double hyphens. The APIs change from program to program, so they don't use hyphens. By the way, that would be the same as doing ls, right? Now, it always goes too wide for me here. I really hate how wide it goes. Unknown command ls for, oh, it's lxc. Okay, the first time it comes up, it's reasonably sized because it stopped. But the second time you run that same command, it goes, oh, you want that container? Let's run it now. It's now running. Oh, it hasn't been issued an IP. That's very interesting. That's very interesting. It should have an IP there. That indicates something wrong with the network bridge. We're going to stop and start it. So we can do sudo lxc. And I believe it's stop, glad, liger, sudo, lxc, start, glad, liger, sudo, lxc, ls. Still no IP. This is something I'm going to have to investigate on my own, and I'll bring you the solution because it's pretty darn important to have that IP. And if it didn't have an IP before, it wouldn't have been able to do that apt update and apt upgrade. So this is very suspicious. One thing I can do to test it is yet another. And let me do this on the same window so you can see the relationship between these two things. Windows, function F11, so that I can do this, put it on half the screen, Control minus to shrink it down, and bring up a PowerShell again. And now I'm using PowerShells enough that I might as well pin it to start, right? Pin to start, right? And so this is how you grow your menu. Resize small. You only put stuff here that you actually use, right? And you let it grow organically instead of using that convoluted advertising mess that Microsoft gives you. Push that over to this side, and we can do WSL shutdown. See, that stopped. It's terminated over there. And the next time we run it, it'll be full screen, but a quick function F11 will give us our ability to do this again. And now we'll try our, oh, that was for my copy buffer. Now we'll try our sudo lxc ls. All right, it stopped. That's usually what you get on the first run. Now, the second time you run it, it usually is now running, but then it usually has an IP assigned to it, which we can see it doesn't. So I definitely have something to investigate here on my own side and bring you the solution. But you can only layer so many miracles upon each other, especially in a single one-take non-edited video. So you're welcome. There is containers, Lxd containers on Ubuntu 20.04. Maybe it was unwise for me to delete 18.04. Maybe 18.04 had to be there with its network bridge in order for the network bridge to be available for 2004. That's actually a fairly solid theory, and I'll investigate that and let you know how it goes. Thanks for joining me, and see you real soon.